was watching a lot of your recent interviews and past interviews. And since you're on the individual, I'd like to kind of ask you to elaborate for our guests and our listeners. What you once said, why can people not accept that they're their own saviors? Mm-hmm. And why would they have a problem with that? Like, if they think, oh man, that's blasphemy even to think. It was just really, really interesting, and I'd like you to maybe talk about that.
That's a great question, and of course it is blasphemy, and yet it shouldn't be, because even church fathers, some of them extremely elevated patriarchs of the church, great scholars of the church, and in the Bible itself, you have references to that man is the kingdom of God. What Jesus' words, what I can do, you can do also, and more. Mm-hmm. And various references, and then of course all the stuff that they left out of the official texts, the Gnostic Gospels. The theme there is also quite strong about man taking responsibility for his own life. If even a Christian was to argue that the backdrop of Christianity was Judaism, well, they still would have trouble there, because the Jewish concept is that man must live a pure moral life here and now, and not believe in any sort of supernatural saviors. He can believe in one if he feels like it, but that's not going to do him any good after he's dead. The whole Judaic pure concept is that man must take responsibility for his existence and his good deeds here and now. So even the earliest roots of Christianity, I don't care whether you call them Gnostic, whether you call them pagan, or whether you call them Judaic, Jewish, then you still have this motif. So it is replete. And that's why people have resistance today. When you talk about self-awareness, the greatest sentences, the greatest words of philosophy ever written, or only 2 words, know thyself. Mm-hmm. They are the root of all philosophy, of all mysticism, of all yoga, of all science, of all existence. And so why then would people, I think I addressed this in various DVDs like Architects of Control, mm-hmm. I'm interested in to find out what it is that people have difficulty accepting that. And of course on one level it means walking the Siddhartha road, which is very difficult, it's painful. And people don't want that legitimate suffering. They'd rather have the pseudo-suffering of a pseudo-world, pseudo-relationships, pseudo-love, and pseudo-civilization. They'd rather have that than walk the road of true inner awareness, where you have to take personal responsibility and not say it's a shared responsibility or a collectivized responsibility. And therefore we have this then ancient conflict between the many, the collective, and the individual. And it doesn't matter if you're in some sort of native tribe or anywhere on earth or at any time in existence, any time in history. This conflict between the many and the one is there. People have these idealistic images of various primitive tribes and what have you, and they all think that these people were idyllic. No, even in those situations, you have the shaman, who is the one, the individual, the thinker, the one who went within, and then you have the bickering horde, the violent, bickering, externalized horde. And so that's no different. So even though there's been technological change in our world, and by the way, that's kind of recent as well if you really think about it.
Yeah.
But you do have this sort of scientific, technical advance, and I'm not bashing it. I think it's fantastic. That shows us the capability, the possibility of what man can do with his rational mind. But unfortunately, and my work is to show the reasons for this, is that psychologically we've remained very, very primitive. And the reasons for that have to do with ancient trauma, number one, things that happened in the ancient past, which of course we're not taught in the schools for a very good reason, because that trauma actually plays into the very hands of the controllers. They manipulate it and use the fact that the mind has been, sort of schizoid, if you want to use that word. Mm-hmm. And then our civilization becomes schizogenic. Everything in it produces more pathology, and this works for the benefit of the master. And so the real reason, to answer your question, why there's a resistance is because of conditioning. Actually, everybody, if you sat down and really talked to them heart to heart, they would realize that they exist. They did not create the universe. They did not create their own mind. They did not create themselves, and that existence is a miracle, and they're here to experience that to a very deep level. I think that all people would accept that. People go through meditation like that when, say, somebody in their family dies, or a parent passes away, or they've seen their brothers die in wars, or what have you. There is this philosophical core to all human beings. But what happens is when we get caught up in the stimuli, and when we get trying to compare each person, and you're in with the peers, and you want to appear to be trendy and modern and what have you, and better than the Joneses, and you got to get that promotion at work, and you have to eke out that existence to get all those material perks, one loses themselves, you see, in the matrix, into this whole illusion of the pseudo world. But in the core of a person, they will accept it. But the reason why they're not doing it is mostly because it's not done in the collective, and the conditioning of schools and parents and priests and teachers, all these false models of authority, they're not doing it. They don't bring us up as children to think of ourselves as individuals, to have any sense of inner directedness, to have models of previous shaman and previous leaders, teachers, mystics, etc. So if I look at my life and compare my life, say, to a lot of other people, it's because I was brought up, like you said earlier in the introduction, reading Alan Watts, reading Krishnamurti, being tied into the mystical tradition of the world and so on. That's missing from the lives of a lot of people. Mm-hmm. Whose big turn-on in the day is, whatever, going shopping or something in the mall or whatever. Or, like I say, getting that promotion and getting that new car. So their world has become completely externalized. And so if you come along then and talk about the meaning of existence to these people and take in responsibility, they don't even have the faintest idea what you're talking about. When they need a priest, they'll just go and get one, just like you need a dentist or a facelift or a makeover. If suddenly tomorrow you feel a bit empty, and let's just dial up a psychologist or a psychiatrist, or maybe head down and find one of these authority figures who will try and give you some guff about the meaning of life and what have you. You just call one up when you need it, just like any prostitute. You don't need to be looking inside yourself. That's too much work.
Yeah, Michael, that's very true. And the people that I worked with and everything, people are lost. And they don't know how to really find themselves until they understand that this matrix hasn't been created for them. I mean, it isn't just this generation. It's past generations, grandfathers, grandmothers, our parents. We've been guided through religions and through governmental factors right into this point where we are right now. But I believe that we've all evolved to a point, actually, I believe, spiritually, mentally, genetically, and everything else, where the forms of government and religions that we have in the mainstream right now cannot cope with the realities of this change that's taken place.
Well, I don't think they can, and I think that they're at a very bad place. What you said just a minute ago is very important. People must be very, very cognizant. People who are thinking of, how to even deepen their knowledge of what's going on, have to bear in mind history. They have to. It's not negotiable. They have to understand that everything that they're looking at today has been the product of a very, very slow, gradual movement. That's why people have difficulty with my work, because it takes them back. It takes them back to Atlantis. It takes them back to the ancient times, mm-hmm. to show them how long ago the roots of tyranny go. They're not just, from the birth of the America. They're not just from the rise of the British Empire. They're not just from the time of the rise of the Nile in the Egypt. Mm-hmm. This need to control, this need for world ownership or what have you. The mentality that sees man just as a slave to be controlled and pushed around is very, very ancient. Mm-hmm. However, for every evil that exists in the world, and you and I, William, have talked about this before, every thing that we could put our finger on that is evil has within it the roots of its own destruction.
Definitely.
It simply is not sustainable because it's an obscenity to nature. It's obscenity to that noumena that you can call it God, you can call it spirit, you can call it Geist, you can call it whatever you want. But that eternal knowledge, that eternal wisdom that is the universe, that is so infinitely older than us, that is going to be here infinitely longer than when we depart, at least from this particular form or frequency of consciousness. Mm-hmm. And that, again, fundamentally to be understood, we did not make it So it doesn't matter what the materialist atheist has discovered. Let them discover it. They're making some interesting finds. Great, no problem. Right? Over here, some other guy is completely materialistic. They're not going to get that. That's all right. That's a state of avidya, or ignorance. Because the human being who doesn't understand that they exist in a plasma of other intelligence, the intelligence of the rocks, the intelligence of the stars, the intelligence of the air, the intelligence of the water, you did not make that, but there it is. And it's not doing something. You know, the clouds that pass in the sky are not particularly doing anything, but they are operating. The trees that grow, the rain that falls. We are the doers. Nature is the beer. It just is. It just is. We have lost this isness. We've lost this sense of being, and we're running around in the doing world, and it's important to do, but to this extreme extent where we've completely lost the thread of who we actually are, and then when we need to find that out, we turn to the mirrors of other people. You tell me who I am. I'm male because you're female. I'm black because you're white, or I'm white because you're black, and I'm intelligent because you're an idiot. You know, we're all in this world of comparison, and that's who we are. That's what's known as the subjective self, the subjective being. So we're in a state of total forgetfulness of self. And then this governmental matrix that you're talking about, it depends entirely on that frequency. The man who steps out, or even the community that steps out, or the world that steps out, or the country that steps out, and there's no doubt about it that birth will be very, very painful.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like all births can be, certain births can be very traumatic. Well, that's what I'm seeing now. So, you know, to emphasize what you're saying, I absolutely agree with it, is that we are now going through an epochal change, a tremendous birth, a painful one, but it's a historical one. And it's one that says we're not so interested now in this kind of subjectivity, pseudo-subjectivity, pseudo-persona, pseudo-selfhood that we've occupied before. And that's why my work is to encourage people to continue in that process, not necessarily run around and try and tinker around in the political sphere, because I don't think that's going to work.
No, I don't think so either.
It's an internal move, an internal shift of consciousness. And if that can continue to happen, and if people can not get afraid of the fear, you know, if they can deal with the fear, deal with that anxiety that rises up as you make this transformation, then there is no doubt about it in my mind that what you're saying is right, and that their hold on their control will simply lessen and lessen and lessen until basically there is a great change.